Good afternoon or good evening, wherever you've been listening to us from, here on this big, beautiful planet we call Earth. This is Michael Cross here with another edition of Unlock the Door Radio here on UCY-TV Productions. Hey, one of the topics I really like to deal with is the future. Where we're going. What do we expect? And this, maybe that inspires me. I'm going to do a plug here for my writing. I recently did a science fiction book called The Destiny of Our Past. You can look that up on Amazon. And I deal with a society in Earth's prehistory. Okay, technologically advanced society during the times of Noah. Maybe a little bit further back than some people assume. And one of the elements that I put in there is that everyone is microchipped. Now, I don't deal with it very much. It's not a major portion of the plot. Most of it's dealing with biotechnology and how people's worship of biotechnology could actually lead to very severe consequences. But with the microchips, what's actually quite interesting, I think, is the idea that you could pretty much have total convenience. You could walk into a store naked if you wanted to, although I don't have any scenes in my book like that. But you could walk into a store naked, buy some stuff, and as long as you could scan this microchip in your body, then it would pay for the stuff you bought, and then you could just, get dressed, I guess. I don't know, if you're buying clothes. Whatever you wanted to buy. So, convenience sake, oh my gosh, it would be very convenient. If you get into an accident, you'd be able to go ahead and let the doctor know, even if you're unconscious, what your previous medical history was. The problem with it, and that this is what I do present in my book, is that you no longer really have privacy. Your location would be something that would be available to whoever was in charge of the program. Your basic ability to associate with other people would be compromised, because if they're chipped as well, then there'd be a record of who you were with. I think we already have this technology, actually, with a lot of the phones that we have now. But at least with a phone, even though we know that we could be tracked, even though that we know that it takes away our privacy, even if the stupid thing's turned off, it could still be unlocked and used to monitor you. The thing with a phone, though, is you could just set it on the shelf at home and leave, and you have a bit of privacy there. You could go for a walk, you could go for a run, you could drive to the beach. You're totally private. And I know there's a controversy as to whether, you'd be able to use computer systems within your car. So I guess let's say you rode your bicycle to the beach. The thing is that a microchip would take that away. You would be manageable, at least in the context of someone knowing what you're doing, where you're at, who you're with, who you might be having an affair with, because obviously if you're next to each other that closely for an extended period of time and sleeping over at their place, then this would be something that would be available for whatever intelligence service was monitoring it. And I'm debating on whether people would actually do it, but I think that they would. I think what is like, let's think about this for a moment, and then I'm gonna read something that's very disturbing, involving athletics and microchipping. So the idea that I was wanting to get to the disturbing stuff first, but I'm just going to wait for a second. Think about this. Within the lifetime of almost everyone listening to this, we went from having a phone that you had in your house, someone could reach you, or you could have that convenience of getting, just saying, oh, I wasn't there when you tried to call. Now, of course, they came in with answering machines. Some of you will remember when those came in. That got rid of that excuse, because then there's a message left on the answering machine, and you can say, well, it must have, something is wrong with my answering machine. But eventually, that didn't work. And at the same time as answering machines, we had pagers, if you remember those, and someone could send their phone number to you if they were wanting you to get in touch with them. That got rid of a little bit more of your personal privacy and disconnection from the system. But then cell phones came in. Now, with a cell phone, at first, they were kind of that's kind of a neat thing to have, and it's convenient. And they were kind of expensive and bulky. But you know how science works. Moore's law. That with competition, you have this incentive to get things smaller and cheaper. And as time went on, cell phones went from being something that you didn't have to have, really, to almost an essential item. In fact, I had an employer actually said, you have a cell phone, you keep it on you during business hours. So you couldn't just sit, if you were having to leave the office, you had to have the cell phone on you. You couldn't just go to your destination and get whatever, even on a break. You had to be reachable during that time period. And, of course, a lot of employers, they reach you off hours, too. But still, this made it to where the debate then went to who should own these cell phones. And I still remember when my oldest kids were in high school. There was this big debate on whether high school students needed to have cell phones. And they were still seen as somewhat of a luxury item. And then it became a necessity. And then it went down to the point now where most kids that are even in first grade have cell phones, or maybe even younger. And we're not talking about just standard cell phones, talking about the really expensive ones with all the features. That opens up the world to, right at your fingertips. But the thing is, it's become now in our culture where has ceased to be a luxury. It has ceased to be a convenience that gives you an advantage, and now it's kind of a requirement almost to have your cell phone. Everyone expects you to have it on you. I mean, most people don't even use an MP3 player when they go running. They plug into some sort of music provider on their cell phone and carry their phone with them. So we're never away from that phone. I'm sure there's people who want me to start talking about the risks, health risks and everything, but I'll save that for a later date. And I think that eventually this is going to lead to a revolution in microchipping, and we're going to have a world in which, if you're not, it'll start out voluntarily. Maybe they'll give you a financial incentive, and then it'll become mandatory. Now, let me read something that I think is very disturbing. Maybe you won't feel as disturbing, I don't know, but I think it's very, very, very disturbing. It's an article out of The Guardian, October 10th, 2017. It's titled, Call for Athletes to be Fitted with Microchips in Fight Against Drug Cheats. And it's got this really cool picture of a microchip. Really cool. And yeah, I'm working on a book right now dealing with the dangers of microchipping, where it could lead to. But there's a quote here. There's a guy named Mike Miller. He's listed as the World Olympians Association's chief executive. Now, to quote the article, he quotes, claimed that Radical anti-doping methods, including implants to recognize the effects of banned substances, are needed to protect clean sports. And, here's a direct quote. Some people say we shouldn't do this to people. Miller said, well, we're a nation of dog lovers. We're prepared to chip our dogs, and it doesn't seem to harm them. So why aren't we prepared to chip ourselves? Now, I find this disturbing. And essentially it's the idea that and he goes on to say, being an Olympian or part of any kind of sports thing is actually a voluntary thing. I mean, no one's forcing you to. So, when you have a club or organization or an employer, I guess, you could extend this to employers, this logic, that you could, say that you're not required to do this. It's like if you apply for a job that would say that you can't have a nose ring. And you've got a nose ring. Well, you have a choice between the job and a nose ring. If you want the nose ring, you just don't work there. But you see, here's what I think is disturbing about this. This is something that would monitor, from what it sounds like he's saying, it would monitor you and be able to tell if you're taking stuff into your body. What does that do to our theories of privacy? Okay, what does it do? Now, sure, you could say, well, you still have to get the shots and everything where they draw the blood out and check it and so forth. But this is something I think that's a little bit more sinister than someone poking a needle into you at your voluntary request. And this is something that gets us, just that comparison between humans and dogs. That scares me because here's what I think will happen with microchips. Here's what I think. At first, you're going to have stuff like, there was a train service in Sweden. There was a video about them experimenting with the microchip concept. Now, I don't know the particulars. I don't know what kind of incentives they had. But maybe you would have a business, let's say an airline. Let's say you have an airline that wants to make check-ins a lot quicker and easier. And what they could do, in theory, is say that you'll get a 10% discount on airfare if you are microchipped, and it'll have something that you just have to walk through a scanner and it will give all of your vital information. Your security, the fact that you don't have a criminal record, who knows, maybe in the future, maybe even be able to put your passport information on there. And your ticket stuff. I'll say this. Going through security lines at the airport where you've got to be holding on to your ticket, you've got your passport, you've got whatever things that they're going to say that you have to take off and then put back on and put onto the rail. It gets very confusing. My daughter, she accidentally had left her passport because it's like your brain's working overtime, trying to keep track of everything and not lose something. And she wound up losing her passport. And she's just like, well, I don't have my passport, because she had to walk through and they had to see the passport. And then a nice guy with security, he ran over and said, oh, I think you left this, ma'am. And, that was fine. But every time I go through an airport, it's like this, almost maybe designed to be that way, to where it's confusing. So maybe the security's watching you to see how you react to it. But think about if you said something like, well, you get to go through an express lane and you get a 10% discount. Then I'm sure there's a lot of people who do a lot of flying who would be like, yeah, here, stick that thing in there. Especially if, you don't want to have 50 different microchips in you. So maybe there could be a microchip that will have the computing capabilities of being able to download a whole bunch of different programs, including GPS, I would think, in the future. And, they'd have this anyway. It's just you could put it in humans as well. And then, other companies start looking at this. Oh, well, employers, security makes it quicker. Just wave your hand across a pad and suddenly the door opens for you. And then we have things like maybe, athletic organizations that are like, well, if you do this, we'll make a deal with you this way, this way, this way. It'll make life a lot easier. And pretty soon it's like that cell phone thing, where originally it starts out as, this is a real advantage, this makes things convenient, which at least you still have the choice, to where it becomes mandatory, where it becomes, oh, you need to have this chip because. Maybe you make a rule for some sort of health insurance. Maybe that's something you can do with national health insurance. We need your records. This will make the system more efficient. It's for your own good, as they always like to put it. And you can be chipped. And once you get to a situation where you get a tipping point from, well, this is kind of weird, I think I'll avoid it, to everyone's doing it, maybe I should get it. When we reach that tipping point, that's when it starts becoming mandatory. That's when your employer says, no, you have to have it. Or medical providers say, you have to have this. Or if you belong to some group, you have to do this. So eventually it becomes part of the society. Now, Edward Snowden had recently, everything's, you say recent, people think it's just like this last month, but a couple of years ago said privacy was pretty much gone. It's not something that this generation has anymore. And I believe Julian Assange said something to the same effect. And we're getting to that level where, where do we want it to lead to? Do we want a system in which, for instance, I know someone, she lives in a country where they take blood of newborns, and she's pregnant and she's going to have her first baby. And I told her, did you know they're going to take the DNA of your child and put it on a record? And she's like, what? What's this all about? And I explained to her what the excuse is. Well, this is for medical research. This is for tracking genetic problems and that sort of thing. But of course, we can think of all the ways it could be misused. You could be put into some sort of special DNA database. So, where does it go? I find it very actually interesting that liberals tend to be the ones that support this kind of thing. Although, in fairness, she's a left-wing person. Okay, I mean, she is not a conservative. But I often have noticed that in recent years, especially during the Obama administration, there's been a turnaround. It's the left and liberals. I'll make a distinction. I'll say the left is the hardcore, left, and then the liberals are kind of like your mainstream liberal type person that you can actually have a conversation with, and they won't, start going crazy. And there's been a tendency now for the liberals and the left to start thinking of this kind of surveillance state in positive terms, because their guy was in, and a lot of this stuff got ushered in, or at least admitted to during his administration. There's a trust for the military because he was associated with the military as well. And the thing is that the conservatives could be, I think they could be sold on this too. Maybe in a few years with Donald Trump as president, if stuff starts getting integrated in society, they'll start defending it as well. I'm not saying all of them, but I'm saying a large portion. And then where does that head? Where does that lead us? I mean, I always do this when it comes to my writing. I try to figure out where's our technology now. If we reach this technological level here, what will that do to the society afterwards? It's like I talked about a show a couple of weeks ago. If we develop sex robots, what will that do that will change society? Well, let's imagine that half the people have access to a synthetic person that's not just some sort of toy, that's very expensive and made to feel like a human being, but actually acts like one, talks like one. Maybe not quite as advanced as a human being, but enough that it's a pretty good substitute. I was talking to a group of guys recently, young guys, and they were all kind of like, oh, women are so nowadays, and that sort of thing. I'm going, what? I'm sure they're saying the same thing about you, but But I mentioned things like, well, what would, if there were sex robots and they didn't even let me finish, they say, oh, I'd buy one, I'd get one. What happens then? Well, then you get to a stage where women don't have partners. I mean, I think women would get such things for diversion, the same way that they might buy some sort of sex toy. It's not something they replace, having a mate with. It's just something to do in their spare time. Versus males, I think they would be more likely to actually replace women with these kinds of things. And then at that stage, you can start thinking, what will that do to marriage? Well, then that means a lot less men want to get married. Well, what does that do for the women that want to have kids? Well, then that will mean, this will come in about the same time biotechnology is going to get a lot more refined and advanced, 15, 20 years from now, that they're already going to the doctor, to get sperm donations, so they may as well get enhanced children. And then it goes on, okay, well, if we're doing enhancements this way, what happens next? And that's how you got to look at life. You've got to look at things. I mean, that's one thing I really respect about Ray Kurzweil. That's how he makes his predictions. Often people go, oh, this is crazy, type stuff. But he does, and he's always right, with his predictions. It's like, if we you don't just say, well, someday we'll have this. Well, he first says, no, first we have this, but then that makes this possible. And then when this is possible, then this will come in. And that's the way you have to look at these kind of technologies with microchips. First, microchips will be something that's like what you do put in your dog is kind of either a tracking system if it's lost, or at least an identity. It tells, okay, return me home to this location. If we have everyone getting chips, then you're going to have a situation in which the powers that be, or even just the economy, is going to try to find the even more efficient ones that will store more information, ones that will have every single solitary thing about you within the base, so that then you get injured, you go to the doctor, you're scanned, it's also got your DNA listed. Computer can pop out what kind of dose you should receive of some sort of particular antibiotic or anything else. All right? This is where we're going technologically. So, what will that do culturally? Well, people are going to get okay with it. Now you're saying, no, Christians won't do that. There's no way Christians will accept this because they've read the book of Revelations and the book of Daniel, and they would just say no. They're not going to get any kind of mark of the beast on them. And then I would remind people that 50 years ago, no self-respecting Christian used birth control. That's right. And all your preachers and ministers were all up there on the pulpit saying this was totally against the Bible. And now, I don't think you get very many, if they do make a statement, I'm talking about even the really super conservative churches, even if they do make a statement about birth control, they always will couch it in, well, God will bless you greatly if you do have kids. But then again, we got to look at the people. There's some people that can't because blah, 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 blah. Then it's thrown, it's cushioned. So it's no more that, okay, this is the norm. If you can't reach the norm because of a health problem or something like that, that's different. No, Christians are now totally integrated into the birth control system. They have bought it in their own families, hook, line, and sinker. They may not give their 16-year-old daughter a prescription for birth control, and they may tell her to abstain, but if she gets married when she's 19, you better believe mom is sitting there going, okay, what kind of birth control are you going to use? Because you guys don't want to start a family just right off, do you? Okay. And most men I know that I've worked with in the United States, if it's mentioned something about, they say they just had their second baby or something, even if they're good Christians, go to church every Sunday, they'll say, yep, I was in the doctor yesterday and they fixed me up, or, the wife gets fixed up. But the thing is, if Christians went that far that quickly when it came to birth control, you better believe they're going to go that far and quicker when it comes to microchipping. Because if, with the, again, the convenience, and then pretty soon it's like almost like required, it'll be like sending your kids to school and saying you're not going to vaccinate them. People are going to totally freak out, and it'll be the same way. You'll be the kid that's the odd one out. If your kids have to be involved in any kind of activities, they'll be the odd one out. They might even not be allowed to be included in sports. If they don't have the microchip, you could argue that they get injured on the play field, and the school doesn't want to assume the responsibility that something could happen to them because the doctor doesn't have adequate information about their condition. So this is how I think it's going to evolve. I think most Christians will stand in line to get microchipped. And they'll make excuses, and they'll I'm just saying this because I don't know, maybe that scripture talking about, the imprint on the hand or the forehead is met in a different metaphorical manner than people have speculated that it is. Even before we had microchips, there was people that speculated that this could be some sort of device put inside of people. I remember that, from hearing shows back in the 1980s, before that, where my mom would sometimes turn these kinds of televangelists on who would talk about that. And that's before we had all this technology. I mean, at least available to the public. And so the thing is that I think most people want to go with the crowd. It's like Friedrich Nietzsche said. He said, if you want to be an individual, you're going to have to sacrifice basically being part of the group, part of the tribe, he said. It's better for you to be yourself and to be authentic and to own yourself, but he said it would be difficult. Okay? It's worth it, but difficult. And I do think that at some point we should consider the fact that humans are a herd species. They will not want to buck the system. You could sell this, believe me, I know a million ways you could sell this to where people would be just almost breaking the door down to get it. Now, again, like I said, it might be a mistake thinking that this is in some way the mark of the beast. But what if it's not? And what if it just means something further down the road is going to come in that's going to be even more intrusive? I don't know. But just the mere fact then that people would be willing to just kind of, I'll ignore that. Yeah, I know that my minister said this a few years ago, but I'm going to ignore that. Just the mere fact that they're going to be willing to ignore it indicates that they would take whatever would come in the future. All right? They'll take whatever comes in the future. Especially if you say, well, how are you going to buy food and clothing and pay your rent or your mortgage if you don't have a chip? People will think that's horrible. It's like saying that, I don't have a bank card. I pay everything in cash. Nowadays, people think that's really crazy. But 30 years ago, cash was the norm. So, we may be winding up going into a cashless society where we then will rely on not just cards, but, being chipped. So, if we use that kind of, if we invent this, where does that take us? Well, like I said, with the robots, you could wind up with the sense that the family structure will totally 150% change from what it is today, which is already a big change from what it was 50 years ago. You could get into a situation in which people voluntarily see themselves as just part of a big unit, a mass. If you know you have no privacy, if you know that everything's monitored, if you're sold on the idea that maybe your use of resources within your home is better regulated because then that just means it's being more efficient, then essentially we turn into something like almost, I would say, akin to the Star Trek species, the Borg, in which, we cease to be individual and we become more collective in our mindset. All right? I seriously think that something like this could evolve into the idea that we no longer see ourselves as autonomous human beings. We see ourselves as a unit. And, and this is not even talking about what's going to come after this. Believe me, there's technology that's being talked about that's way more intrusive than sticking a microchip in someone and checking to see if they've used drugs or where they're located or who they're with. There's technology out there to stick into our brains that could regulate us in regards to not just mental conditions, but also efficiency. I was reading an article recently talking about you could combat memory loss through implants into the brain. But remember, whatever you put into the brain is going to affect you as an individual later on, or even right there. The interface between this, whatever this device is, and whatever computer it's connected to, we just assume is on our side, when it may be the opposite. It may be the interface is working on us, not with us. It's working to control us, not us being in control of it. So, I know a lot of this stuff sounds really strange and really bizarre. But you know what? A lot of the technology we take for granted now would have sounded really strange and really bizarre 30 years ago. And it's changed our lives completely. I mean, look at those phones. If you're in a group of people nowadays, there's very little socialization taking place. People are looking at their phones. Because you know why? We're convinced that what's on our phones is way more interesting than the person we're sitting next to. And that's a huge change. We're becoming socially dysfunctional. And this could also lead to this world I'm talking about, where men and women pull apart, and eventually everything, you divorce sex from reproduction. I mean, not sex from reproduction. You always have to have that. It doesn't have to be, sexual. I mean, you just have to get the sperm to put into a woman. That's, you can get that in a variety of ways. But you divorce romance from reproduction, which has been something that eugenicists have talked about since the time eugenics came in. You might fall in love with a person that's not compatible genetically to produce the most optimal offspring. Well, if people are, guys are going to go off with their synthetic girlfriends, and women are going to be just kind of like, okay, well, you're good. Then that means we can start creating, the eugenic society. We get to see a population crash because, of course, most women probably just opt for maybe one kid under these circumstances, waiting until they're much older to have kids. And so it's kind of the new world order dream. You might get better quality, you might get population crash, and you also get control over the people's minds, souls even. I mean, in their opinion, what's there not to love? In our opinion, we better be asking these questions real fast too. Anyway, I